It was a big shift for me as a scientist to all of a sudden have my entire world flipped upside down. I couldn't unsee this. I couldn't
Right.
unexperience it. I know what a hallucination is like. This is not one of them.
Hi, Nancy. Thanks for joining me. I heard you had a near-death experience. So let's hear about it.
I was a scientist, a science writer. I did a lot of technical writing. I really didn't believe in anything other than, this physical existence. At the time that this all happened, I was living near Boulder, Colorado. I was on a bicycle in a bike lane doing my errands around town and was hit by a woman driving a very large SUV. She was texting, she wasn't paying attention to what she was doing, blew through the intersection and just hit me broadside. I did manage to get stuck on the underside of her vehicle. And I know that sounds horrible, but it was better than the alternative. I had the experience during that time of being in two places at once. One was still in me, in my body, under the vehicle, and another part of me, which I would call my soul or my higher self, was standing off at a distance observing the whole thing. The part of me that was still in my body was very afraid, as you can imagine. It really just focused on survival at that point, doing everything I could to stay alive. And then that part of me that was outside of the accident, really, for want of a better term, out of body, was very calm and serene almost, saying, "This is all going to be fine. Don't worry, it's going to be okay. You're going to be okay." I knew that the part of me that was under the vehicle, the human me, knew that something had just changed, but I didn't have the time or the ability at that point to really start thinking about it because I was focused on survival. When the paramedics got there, which was pretty quick, that's when kind of both of those aspects of my consciousness merged back into my body. It turns out once they got me to the ER, my spine was basically broken. I mean, I had 9 vertebrae that were cracked all to pieces. One of them was almost completely blown apart. They stopped counting fractures at 100. Most of the damage was to my neck and my spine, all up and down. Luckily, I had a helmet on. I would have probably died had I not had a helmet. So in the ER, everything was cool. I mean, I didn't have any experiences there, but I did have to go into surgery a few days later just to repair, all the damage in my spine so that I could walk again. This happened on a Friday, so I was in, ICU over the weekend, and then I went into surgery on Monday afternoon. And as soon as the anesthetic was put into me, I coded. I had no blood pressure, no pulse, my breathing stopped. And then I found myself on a hillside standing up and I'm like, "Wait a minute, this is not where I'm supposed to be right now." And so I knew right then something was up. I didn't know what it was right away, but I remember that I was in surgery. I remember I was really badly injured. And so what am I doing? Standing up on a hillside looking out over mountains and forests, and it's beautiful. Don't get me wrong, it was amazingly beautiful, but I was confused really at first. Time in these NDEs, I'm sure you've heard and your audience has heard, we can't really equate time here to time on the other side. So it's hard to know how long I was really in that state, but it seemed like a long time. And after a little while, a couple of things started to occur to me. I started to notice that I was feeling almost like an energy coming into me, but it wasn't like heat or sound or anything like that. Somehow I knew that it was the energy of divine love. And I don't know how I knew that. It felt peaceful and calming and loving and accepting. And that's when I kind of did an internal double take, like, wait a minute, my background as a kid told me that I wouldn't have any chance at all of going to a happy afterlife. That wasn't, for somebody who was a non-believer, that wasn't in the cards. And what I was starting to feel was acceptance for who I was and love, and kind of a welcoming presence was there. It was almost like it was really like being cradled or hugged, but very gently, with full knowledge of who I was and that I had, we all screw up in our lives, but that I was still welcomed and accepted. And then I began to wonder, like, whoa, wait a minute, this isn't right. When I began to wonder if I had died on the operating table. I was still that analytical about the whole thing. As a scientist, here I am still trying to analyze what was going on. And that seemed like a really strong possibility. And then the second thought was, well, wait a minute, if I had died, why am I here with this loving presence, with all of this love and acceptance? Because I was told that I would not go to any place happy. I didn't voice that out loud. That was really an internal wondering. It's just, we have a thought, we wonder about it. The answer came from outside everywhere. I can't say that it was a male voice or a female voice, but it was very powerful. But that voice said, "This is your home. You are a part of me. You're a kind of a child," was the implication. You're a part of me. You're part of this realm. This is your home. Welcome home. And I still kind of get choked up about it because it was so loving. And when that voice came and said that, then I realized, oh my God, now I remember that earth thing. That was just a temporary existence, and this really is home. And I remembered that this place, this state of being, was home. This state of consciousness was home for our souls. And I just wept. I felt like I was weeping or crying. It was just so powerful and moving. And finally, there was what felt like a female presence kind of come into the area of where I was standing. It was really hard for me to get a clear view of her face, sort of a little fuzzy, but she gave me this big, amazing hug and told me that she was going to teach me what I needed to know in order to go back to my life on earth and make it one that was worth living. I mean, at the point that I had gone into this NDE, I was relatively unhappy. But she said, the point of this is that I want you to go back, or we want you to go back and have a loving, happy existence and help other people in your family learn to love, to be loved, to experience love, to share, to really live in a loving and compassionate way. That was really why she was helping me. And first, when she said to go back to your life on earth, I really did not want to go. Like, it's kind of funny because I sort of pitched a fit. At that point, it was like I was a 2-year-old having a temper tantrum. Not quite that bad, not rolling on the ground, but I was not happy about the idea of being sent back. But she said, well, you've already agreed to go back. That was part of your plan when you chose this life that you're in right now as Nancy. And I said, well, I sort of said, I really don't remember that part. So she showed me what that looked like. It was almost like a video. It was more than that, but the closest I can come is like a big video in the air in front of me of her observing me with, I guess you could call them the angels and maybe God as well, or that divine presence, kind of agreeing to some of the things that I wanted to do and experience, but also how I wanted to serve. what I had agreed to was to be basically an atheist. I wanted to experience that turning away from that divine presence for a while, but then I wanted to re-enter it. I wanted to come back. And I had made this deal that there were 3 or 4 points in my life, my earlier life, where I had the opportunity to make that shift back to being a spiritual person, and I missed them all. And this was sort of the end point. If I didn't change back to being a spiritual person at point A, B, or C, then I would have to have kind of a big wake up call. And that's what this was that wake up call, because I had missed those other opportunities. So when I saw that, I realized, well, okay, I do remember that now. I sort of did already remember it. It was really just being obnoxious. Because I really didn't want to go back.
Right.
It's hard here, it's really hard here, and it's so much different. It's different over on the other side. It is better in some ways. We don't get to experience the same things as here, but there's a lot less that gets in your way, and it's easier to do certain things. And so I really didn't want to come back here. So anyway, when she showed me that video, I just decided, okay, well, I'll just go along with this for now and see what happens, and I'll learn from this woman. If I was to put that time in here on earth, learning the things that I did with her, it would probably take a good couple of months. And I'm not going to go into all of that detail here, because it's in my book and in my blog, and people can take their time and read it in detail. So I'll go over some of the highlights. Some of the super powerful parts of it, though, really made a huge impact on me. There was one part, I don't talk a lot about it in these interviews, so I do want to highlight it here. It was like I was in this holographic kind of experience where I was trying to wrap my head around what my path in life was supposed to be. So she had me standing on a big prairie or something like that. It was a big open area. And all of a sudden around me, kind of again in the air, appeared this big map, like an old-fashioned, map, but it was just all around me. But it wasn't a map of Earth, it was a map of my life, showing kind of in real time all the different paths that I could have taken, in little areas where if I had done this, here's where it would have gone. And part of that whole teaching was that there isn't necessarily one right path through your life. You can make adjustments. There are many, many, many ways to work through a life. It was powerful to see that huge kind of visual representation of there is no one right path. No matter what you do, it's a choice, and you can adjust and make changes and really have amazing experiences and learn a lot of things no matter what path you take. The biggest one that I really like to talk about, it was my life review. I was taken to this big, beautiful pond, and it looked like it was kind of up in the mountains somewhere. My whole NDE was like I was out hiking in the mountains. That's what it was like. That's where I like to be. They took me out in the mountains, and she asked me to just sit down at the edge of the pond and touch the surface of the pond and see what happens. By this time, I was really weary of lessons. I just wanted to be done with it. And because it seemed like forever. This was actually one of the last lessons that I had. And she put her hands on her hips and she said, "Would you just do it, please?" I did. I reached out and just tapped the surface of the water and just sat back and watched. And there were many lessons in this, so we'll talk a little bit about these. But on top of all of those little ripples all across the surface of the pond, when I looked out there, it was my life. All these little different videos were moments of my life. And when I looked at one of those little video moments, I got sucked back into it. It was very weird and very cool at the same time. I got to re-experience that moment, whatever that was. So one of them was when I was a teenager, and I had said something to intentionally hurt my younger sister. You know, siblings can be nasty to each other, and honestly, I was at that time. I was really nasty to her, and I said something very hurtful, very intentionally, and she didn't appear to react outwardly. But during this little life review, not only could I see and experience myself saying that again, I also got to feel what she was feeling. And it was horrifying to me. And it still, it still chokes me up like, oh my God, I can't believe how horrible she felt, and I was the cause of it. And that experience was the catalyst for me to change my entire life. Because we don't live on this planet by ourselves. Everything that we do and say has an effect on other people, whether we want to admit it or not. And when you feel how you make someone else feel, it can really give you a completely different view on the nature of compassion. Now, to balance that out, because I was feeling really horrible when I saw that, here's a time when you did something that was helpful for someone. It was a clerk at a grocery store at Christmas. I tell this story a lot. It really moved me when I was able to feel how good she felt when I told her she was doing an amazing job on a really busy day and having to put up with abusive customers. Not me that day, but I felt how grateful she was and how much that lifted her spirits. And when she went home that night, she was able to bring a better outlook on life to her kids and her family. So even little things like that really have an impact on other people. The whole thing really for me was about love. Everything that I learned, it always came back to love, compassion, and kindness. It's really all about coming back here and being love as much as possible, including to ourselves, because a lot of us, it's easier to love another person or to show kindness or compassion to someone else, but we tend to beat ourselves up. And so that's, we're supposed to be bringing that into our own lives as well. If you can't do anything else, be grateful. That's a form of love. It's a form of appreciation. It really strengthens those spiritually energetic bonds that we all have. Even if we don't say anything with our mouths or speak it or our actions, just our energy alone, if we're bringing love into a situation, that energy of our own internal love can really change a situation, even if we don't say anything. So energy is powerful because we here are all energy. We're all based on energy, even though it doesn't seem like it. We really are. I did have one last thing that my teacher helped me with before she sent me back. She gave me an energy healing because she knew that my body, when I woke up, would be in a lot of pain and it would take a long time to heal. I was really afraid to go back into my body because I knew how badly broken it was. Like, it wasn't clear whether I was going to ever be able to walk again. I was terrified about that. And I was also afraid of the pain. I'm kind of a wimp. So I didn't want to feel all that pain. And so she gave me what I would call an energy healing over parts of my body that would be the most painful. And then sent me back, and I woke up in the recovery room. It was actually, now in hindsight, it was kind of humorous. It wasn't at the time. I was just angry as hell at the time. Yeah. I literally woke up kicking and screaming, like top of my lungs, screaming to go back.
Wow.
And the nurse they had a nurse there with me as they were waking me up, and she's like doing a double take. She ran and got the doctor because they thought something was really happening medically during that time. So she ran and got the doctor, and I'm just babbling and yelling, like, just send me back. I just want to go back. And they're looking
Right.
at me like, what is this? So that, it took me a while to really calm down. And I kept asking for my friend, my teacher, and they had no idea what I was talking about. They thought it was the woman that was waiting in the waiting room for me, my friend. They brought her in. I'm like, no, that's not who I'm talking about. That's not who I want. I'm the one that was with me when I was dead. And they're like, what are you talking about? So it took me a bit of time to really calm down from that. And for the next 12 hours, I really didn't sleep. I was just thinking about what happened, and I was afraid to tell anybody because I imagined that they were going to lock me up in a psych ward. That's
Right.
really what I was afraid of. And I thought maybe I needed it because I didn't know what this was. So the next morning, one of the chaplains came in, and you have to kind of realize that when I was brought into the hospital, this was a Lutheran facility at the time, and I refused chaplain service because I told them, look, I'm an atheist. It's cool for you to be here, but I really don't want to see a chaplain. And they honored that the whole time before the surgery. She walked in that next morning, and I literally said, oh, thank God you're here.
Wow. Yeah.
Because I don't know what to do with what happened. And so she spent was close to an hour with me talking about that I had died, and she wanted to hear as much as I could tell her. I told her as much as I could. You have to keep in mind too, at the time I was refusing pain med, so I was not like flying high on anything because I was refusing it. I was only on Tylenol at the time, which in hindsight crazy, but that's
Yeah.
all I needed. The reason I was refusing anything else was I didn't want it messing with my head. So I was really lucid. I want people to understand I wasn't like hallucinating or anything. I know what a hallucination is like. This is not one of them. And she said, what you had was what's called a near death experience. And I want you to understand that it was real. So I was super lucky. I was one of those few near death experiencers at that time who was lucky enough to have someone right there explaining to me what had happened, that it was real and that I wasn't crazy. That was a huge gift. If I hadn't had that assistance right away, I don't know that I would have talked about this with anybody else. It was a big shift for me as a scientist to all of a sudden have my entire world flipped upside down. I wanted it to go back to the way it was, but I knew I couldn't unsee this. I couldn't
Right.
unexperience it.
I heard another interview that you did where you talked about a spiritual experience that you had right before your father died.
Yeah.
Can you share that?
Yeah. This was about a year before he passed. He was a big hunter. He loved hunting, he loved fishing, and he told me he was bound and determined to go hunting. He's so ill and so frail, he can barely walk, and I'm like, this is nothing, not a recipe for, a good day. And so I volunteered to take him out and just make sure he was okay while he was out hunting. So I drove over to his home the day before, and I actually, through all that time, I was a meditator. I wasn't doing it for spiritual reasons. I was doing it to learn how to calm down because I was so anxious all the time. When I got over there in the evening, I was really feeling agitated. And so I went into, the guest bedroom and just meditated for quite a while. All of a sudden, I wasn't me anymore. Like I was viewing someone else's life. And it was a young man named Sidney, Sidney. I was sort of like looking out of Sidney's eyes. He was 18 or 19 at the time, and he was standing with a small group of other young men the same age, and one of them was my dad. And Sidney and he were really good friends, and Sidney kept calling my dad Willie, and my dad's name was, we called him either Bill or William. I called him Dad, but everybody else usually called him Bill or William. I'd never heard anybody call him Willie, ever. And I didn't know who Sydney was. I'm sort of watching from Sydney's eyes this interaction that he had with my dad as a teenage boy. And he kept calling him Willie. The other boys didn't know it at the time, but Sydney had just volunteered to go into the Army, I think it was. Well, Sydney, he didn't get drafted, he volunteered. He went off and fought in Vietnam, and here I am watching all of this. But then there was a point at which, a couple of years, after he left, that I'm watching Sydney in a firefight, and it was bad. I don't know that it was napalm, but it was like something like that, where the trees were on fire and there were gunshots all over the place. And Sydney was with his squadron, and they were trying to go somewhere, and he was trying to help his squadron get to where they were going, but he died. At that point, I knew Sydney was giving me this experience, and he told me directly. It was like all of a sudden I disconnected from it, and he said, "Tell Willie I'm sorry that I didn't come back." And because he knew I was his daughter, and I was just watching all of this. So this next morning, I didn't tell my dad that night. I went out and sat and watched TV with them, my parents, and went to bed because I knew it would freak my mom out. And so I didn't say anything in front of them. But the next morning, when my dad was getting ready to go hunting and we were putting the gear in the truck, I took him aside and I said, "Dad, who's Sydney?" He literally stood back and his eyes got really big, and he said, "How do you know Sydney?" And I said, "Well, he came to me last night and he told me he was sorry he didn't come back from Korea." And my dad, I'd never seen my dad cry. He was crying. And it took him a while to compose himself, and he said, "That's right, Sydney was my best friend when I was young. He was a little bit older, and he went off to Korea and died. He never came home." And I said, "He wanted you to know he was sorry he couldn't come back."
Wow.
Yeah, and as you can tell, it's still really powerful that we can have that connection. Sydney really wanted my dad to know that he loved him as a friend, and he wanted him to know how sorry he was. And he was able to do that, through me. And I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just in that place and receptive and passed along the message. And I don't know how it affected my dad. He was a very quiet guy, but he did thank me for that, and we never talked about it again. He didn't want to go there.
Yeah.
It really affected him, but I think it helped him because I think he knew at that point that he wasn't going to make it out of this cancer thing alive.
Didn't you also hear music shortly after he passed as well?
About a year later, my dad passed. And the moment that he passed, I was asleep. He died at like 4 a.m. I was asleep, and I woke up and I could see him at the foot of my bed. And I knew he had just gone. And he was there for just a few moments. He didn't say anything. I think he just wanted to say goodbye. And then he just sort of disappeared behind a curtain. It was really kind of bizarre. And then that's when my brother called and said, Dad just died. So I drove over there with my partner at the time. As we walked up to the front door of the house, I reached out to grab the handle and open the door, and I was heard music. And it was not human music. This was angels singing divine music, beautiful choral music that we can't produce here on this planet. And I couldn't hear anything else. It was so powerful. And I turned to my partner. I said, "Do you hear that?" He's like, "What?" Because he didn't hear it. I did. And along with that music, I felt and almost heard utter joy, my dad's joy, and a welcoming. And thought maybe, just maybe, my brother and my mom had put on some, orchestral music or something to kind of calm things down. They didn't have anything on. And I'm walking around listening to this music, and I knew my dad was okay. I knew that just for that moment, I had a little brief, like, little glimpse of the spiritual realm again, and then I shut it down hard because it didn't fit into my scientific worldview. But for that moment, I knew this reality was much bigger than we think it is. When I had my NDE, I heard that music. It was incredible. Like, you can't describe it. It's just indescribably beautiful, and I almost can't listen to human music anymore. But it was so powerful. But there are a lot of people who have these shared death experiences. About a year after my own NDE, my physician, I finally got up the courage to tell him what had happened. He admitted he has shared death experiences all the time
Oh,
at the hospital with his patients. He said at least once a month.
he
Where
personally does with.
he attends a lot of people in the last days of their lives in the hospital, and he says, "Yep, this happens all the time."
Uh-huh.
And doctors don't like to talk about it. Most doctors still don't want to talk about it because they don't really know what to do with it. And he's like, "I think it's the coolest thing in the world because it means that we survive.
Yeah.
Our consciousness survives." So it's really powerful.
Thank you so much for doing this. How should people like reach out to you?
Yeah, you can take a look at my website, nancyrynes.com. Everything's out there. There's information on how to get my book, my classes, any workshops and speaking engagements. It's all out there.
Hey, thank you for watching. If you want to know what video to watch next, I would suggest this one. This seems like a really good video for you to watch right now. Yeah, that seems like a good one. Oh, you could subscribe. You could do that too. Subscribe or watch this video. Up to you. Bye-bye.